Haarlem, 1943. A teenager with two tight braids coasts into a city park, the wicker basket on her bicycle bumping softly against the front wheel. A woman sits alone on a bench, gloved hands folded, eyes on a folded sheet of paper. The girl asks the woman's name as if she is looking for an aunt. The answer matches the photograph in the girl's pocket. A small pistol slides free from her sleeve, a single shot cracks the still air, and the bicycle is already rolling again, tires whispering over the gravel as the body slumps sideways. This is the story of how a young Dutch courier turned a bicycle and a clean face into a weapon that stalled an occupation's machinery. If you want to see how small moves can jam a giant war machine, subscribe and stay with me. The ride starts quiet and ends with the brakes screaming. Before the uniforms ever noticed her, Freddie Overstegen lived in a one-room space in Schoten, near Haarlem, with a mother who took in runaways and people who could not show their faces. She and her sister, Truus, gave up their bed for strangers who knocked after midnight, and they learned early that silence could mean survival. After Germany crossed the Dutch border on 10th May 1940, Haarlem filled with checkpoints, seized radios, and posters announcing new rules. The sisters carried banned leaflets from house to house, tucked under bread or hidden in coat linings, and they used bicycles because no one stopped a child carrying milk. The local resistance approached them in 1941, not with flowers but with tests. In a bare room that smelled of earth and potatoes, they endured staged interrogations meant to mimic the Gestapo's rhythm, and they kept their stories straight. Their mother signed off with a single demand: remain human. The phrase was not a permission slip. It was a barbed boundary they would carry into doorways with pistols in their hands. Training built from nothing more than trust and space. In an underground potato shed, they learned to strip and assemble firearms by feel, practiced patience with sand-filled magazines, and timed their movements to the creak of a guard's boots above. The sisters carried messages first, then matches. Sabotage began small. A jerrycan of fuel tipped under a warehouse eave, a fuse fashioned from strips of cloth, a night spent watching an empty street through a drain grate to learn a patrol's exact pace. Youth acted as camouflage. Teenage girls could stand close to a lorry queue and be invisible, and they could flirt with a bored sentry just long enough for a second pair of hands to slip under a gate with a sack of rags soaked in kerosene. Bicycles made the city elastic. Steel frames bounced over the cobbles, front lamps blacked out with taped slits, chains oiled to silence, and the baskets cradled anything from bread to pistols wrapped in dishcloths. Forged papers were more than slips of official paper. They were rehearsals, voices, and faces. Freddie practiced signatures in the margins of newspapers and learned to answer to a borrowed name without blinking. The work expanded into liquidations when courier runs no longer cut it. The targets were German personnel and Dutch collaborators who fed the Sicherheitsdienst with names and addresses, and the methods were chosen for speed, deniability, and disappearance. A common approach relied on misdirection. One girl asked for directions, a second girl stepped from behind a hedge or doorway, and a third held the street with a bicycle angled across it like a gate. When the resistance needed a man to walk to the edge of a forest after dark, a light laugh and a promise of a drink did the trick better than a pistol at the belt. Yet the invitation led to a clearing lit by the thin moon, and the walk ended abruptly with a command and a shot. Not every door opened to deception. Sometimes they knocked, confirmed a name, and ended a life in a narrow hall where the echo carried down 2 floors. Hesitation turned people to ghosts. Resolve kept them breathing. Inside their circle, boundaries stayed bright. Orders to harm children came down twice and were refused. and the refusal stood even when saying no risked breaking ties with men who controlled weapons and money. The unit grew tighter in 1943 when Hannie Schaft, a law student who had declined to swear loyalty to the occupiers, arrived with a sharp mind, careful hands, and a face the security police would soon learn to fear. Together, Hannie planned, Truus led with nerve, and Freddie mapped exits with a scout's memory. The three carried out sabotage runs against infrastructure that kept the occupation humming. They targeted stores, transport links, and the offices where files flowed, because disrupting records often hit harder than cracking a single skull. Freddie specialized in routes. She scouted canal paths that curved behind courtyards, alleys that ran into alleys, and footbridges that looked like dead ends until you approached them at an angle. When a mission required tracking a target, she also studied habits. She noted a man's preferred cafe table, how he folded his coat over his arm, the hour he left to visit a mistress, and whether he turned right or left after the tram stop. Weapons discipline mattered as much as grit. The girls carried pistols in handbags with buttons that opened quickly, and they practiced drawing and firing from hip level because line-of-sight shots telegraphed intent. A bicycle could become an alibi. A bell rung at the right moment made a witness remember a child rushing to the market, not the soft crack of a suppressor under a thick scarf. Everything worked because it was unspectacular. Guards expected men with stubble and leather jackets, not teenagers comparing lipstick shades while watching a warehouse door. Even so, the risk grew with each action. Neighbors watched from curtains. A single whisper in a stairwell could undo months of work, so the unit shifted safe houses every few nights and burned notes as routine. By early 1943, fear was a constant, but so was momentum. The network around Haarlem adjusted, linking small cells through couriers who never met twice in the same place. Back in the park, the shot is real and the reaction is instant. A couple on a nearby path stands frozen. A dog barks. The girl with braids pushes onto the promenade and slips into a flow of cyclists pedaling towards the river. She rides upright like any schoolgirl, knees pumping, coat tied tight. A policeman at the gate glances at the handlebar basket, sees bread and folded paper, and waves her through without a word. 2 streets away, she takes a turn between a cafe and a tobacconist into a narrow lane that smells of yeast and coal. The lane opens onto a courtyard studded with washing lines, and she coasts across with her head down, as if embarrassed to cut through. In a shadowed shed behind a locksmith's shop, Freddie trades her recognizable bicycle for another, identical except for a scratch beneath the saddle. The first bike leans against a wall, innocent and harmless again. Another day, a collaborator in a dark overcoat follows Truus along a canal after sundown, encouraged by a smile and a promise of a drink. A few paces behind, Freddie matches footsteps with a steady tempo, hand in her bag on a pistol smooth from practice. They pass a street lamp where the light blurs in mist. Truus slows, turns as if to kiss, and the man leans forward instinctively. Freddie steps close, says his name so he looks at her face, and the shot knocks him backward to the water's edge. Civilians appear at windows, shapes moving behind glass, but the 2 girls are already walking away, not running, coats closed, faces composed. At the next bridge, they split, Truus turning right toward a crowd, and Freddie left into a street under repair. On another morning, an arson run unfolds under the cover of a delivery. Freddie pedals a cargo bicycle loaded with wrapped parcels that smell suspiciously of paraffin, and a pair of boys in caps help unload at a warehouse door. Inside, a bundle of rags slips under a stack of crates near a structural post. A time delay fuse made from cigarette ends, and a sliver of powder begins to eat itself to ash. And Freddie is already gone. cheeks flushed from the ride as she merges with a tram's clatter. Checkpoints thicken after each operation, and the questions get sharper. Freddie approaches one on a bridge with a child in her rear seat, a blanket draped over the small back, and a forged ration card tucked under her tongue. At the front of the line, a guard asks for papers and glances at the child, who stares back with wide eyes. Freddie coughs out the card, retrieves it with a steady hand, as if embarrassed by her clumsiness, and the guard stifles a smile and waves her through. Some missions run hot from the first step. In a cramped hallway lined with cheap prints, a target realizes what's coming, knocks a vase to the floor, and reaches for a telephone. Freddie is forced to fire twice, once to stop the hand and once to stop the shout. The noise brings a neighbor to the landing, older eyes peering through a cracked door. Freddie holds her gaze for a beat, a warning and a plea, and the door closes with a soft click instead of a scream. Hanny's arrival tightens the planning. In a back room over a seamstress's shop, she lays out a timetable with a pencil, assigning eyes on, shooter, and route rider, and she adjusts times to the tram schedule so alibis will be plausible. On a cold night, the trio moves to sabotage a rail spur used for military transports. Freddie counts seconds between the watchman's passes, times whispers to the crunch of his boots, and slides a wedge into place to chew up a wheel flange at speed. A patrol suddenly rounds the far corner of the yard, boots quickening. The girls flatten behind stacked ties. Breath steams, fingers numb. A stray cough would end it, but the patrol turns away, more interested in warming hands by a brazier. Pressure builds when the Sicherheitsdienst circulates a description. A red-haired woman with glasses, a tall girl with steady eyes, a smaller one with braids who blends too well to notice. Streets feel narrower. Meetings shrink to minutes. During one rendezvous, a watcher follows Freddie from a church square, shadow long in late afternoon. She tests him with a turn into a shop selling stamps and paper. He lingers outside, pretending interest in a display of pens. She buys a single sheet of writing paper and waits for a couple to leave. When the door swings, she steps out with them, puts her arm through the woman's as if they are family, and the watcher loses his thread in a knot of bodies. Another day brings a harder choice. Intelligence points to a man who keeps files under his kitchen floor and a child in the next room with a chipped enamel mug. Freddie and Truus walk away with teeth clenched and go looking for the man again when the child is at school. The work keeps touching the same nerves. On a bridge at dusk, a German non-commissioned officer lights a cigarette, and Freddie is close enough to smell the tobacco. She looks past him to the water and files the small details. His habit of tapping ash twice, his limp, his route to a girlfriend's building. When the order comes to remove him, the timing fits the lull between patrol rotations. Freddie and Hanny approach from opposite ends of the street, collide with the NCO as if by accident, and roll in between them in a tangle of elbows and coats where a shot can be disguised as a bicycle chain slapping the frame. Occasionally, the city itself turns against them. Rain slicks the stones, a chain slips a tooth, and a delay snowballs into danger when a knocked-over crate draws attention to a rear exit. Freddie adapts in small, fast moves. She skids the bicycle deliberately to cut her own shin for an honest trickle of blood, and a startled sentry lets compassion outrun suspicion long enough for her to pass. Fear is constant, but so is the discipline to box it tight. Before each action, Freddie runs the route in her head like a rosary. Left at the bakery, across the tram lines, pause under the sign with the missing letter, right at the green shutters. When a target fails to appear one day, they abort. The rule is never to repeat the same setup. Instead, Freddie shifts to other work, ferrying a Jewish child from a safe flat to a farm outside the city, with a packet of forged papers and a loaf of bread. The checkpoint on the road out of town is slower than usual, and the guard digs under the blanket on the bicycle's rear rack. A small hand grips her coat. She begins to hum a tune that matches a march on the radio, and the guard's attention drifts upward toward the music. As the months stack up, the stakes climb. A raid nets part of the network, and the SS drags men into trucks from a cafe on the Grote Markt. Whispers turn to silence in neighborhoods where open eyes mean danger. The red-haired law student becomes notorious. Posters with her face appear, and the trio adjusts again. Meetings move to markets, messages pass folded in newspapers at a butcher's stall, and Freddie watches for anyone who is wearing the wrong shoes for the weather. Between actions, the sisters live like ordinary girls whenever they can. They braid each other's hair, argue over a borrowed scarf, and pretend for an hour that the world is not held together by lies and courage. Then, inevitably, reality taps the window with 2 fingers. A shipment of forged IDs must be moved across town with someone on the tail, or a target's pattern shifts after a close call, and the map in Freddie's head has to be redrawn while she rides. Confidence and doubt ride side by side on the handlebars. Some nights, Freddie can hear every bicycle chain in the city and knows which ones will be friends. Other nights, the silence itself feels like a trap. By late 1944, everyone is thin, everyone is tired, and winter sits heavy on the canals. Still, the work continues, because stopping would mean conceding the neighborhood to men with lists and leather gloves. In the park, after the shot, the bicycle carries Freddie out toward streets she knows better than the back of her hand. She rides past a row of lime trees that hide her from a patrol car, cuts behind a tram stalled by a broken line, and disappears again. Her face remains what it needs to be: bored, rushed, dutiful, unseen. The pistol rests under a folded cloth in the basket, and the basket looks like it has always carried bread. An hour later, in a kitchen warm from a small stove, she reheats coffee gone bitter and repeats the route to Truce and honey. Every turn is noted, every potential witness listed, every unexpected sound analyzed and filed away. Outside, a siren rises and falls. Inside, 3 young women adjust their plan for the next hour because survival comes in 60-minute slices and the occupation doesn't pause for grief or pride. The same bicycle waits by the door, mud drying on the tires. The city breathes, and the work goes on. They exfiltrated quietly after that park shooting and confirmed through contacts that the victim had been gathering names for the Sicherheitsdienst in Haarlem. Records vary on the exact number of arrests averted, but the team understood the file flow had been disrupted. The trio's cadence of sabotage, courier work, and targeted killings multiplied pressure on local collaborators and stretched the occupiers' security apparatus thin. Their actions bought time and space for smuggling operations and eased the path for families trying to disappear. When Hanny was captured and executed in the dunes near Overveen on 17 April 1945, the surviving 2 adapted with shorter meetings, fewer risks, and tighter discipline. Post-war, both sisters received recognition only decades later, and Freddie never recited numbers. Tactically, their story shifted local resistance practice toward mobility, youth cover, and strict compartmentalization of routes and roles. The occupiers responded with heavier patrols and tighter document checks, but bicycles still slid through cracks they could not close. The practical lesson was simple and hard. A tool as ordinary as a bicycle could tip the balance when paired with discipline, nerve, and clean boundaries. Force alone rarely wins. The edge came from reading terrain, people, and time. For more untold operations from World War II brought to life, subscribe and join us for the next mission.